at the time. I was wondering if I could get everybody to stand and for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, okay. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Becky Peterson. I am the managing broker of Keller Williams Premier Realty. This is Deb Miller. She is the managing broker of Jim Maloof in Morton. And we have Craig Martin with Martin Inspections. We have Cameron Anderson with Integrity, excuse me. And of course, Jim Manning with Kyle Royster, Booker and I. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. And Deb's up. You got your microphone? Okay. Is it on? Okay, there you go.
Basically, I'm going to go over.
Just talking to me.
Basically, I'm going to go over what your whole house inspection covers. I hope everybody knows there's basically 5 parts to that. The roof, the AC and heating, the plumbing, the sewage, the electrical, and material structural damage. We need to educate our buyers on any additional inspections that need to be written on, such as the chimney, the fireplace, the windows, and irrigation systems. Or even a pool would be an extra inspection that you would have to add. And then we also need to let them know that if they need a mold, it's either yes or no. And if you don't write yes on your contract and you have an inspection and there might be mold, you can't do a test. So you need to kind of watch that on the inspection repairs. And then radon and a well and septic. And then we always want a disinterested party to do the inspection. We don't want somebody that is an uncle that's doing your inspection that's certified. There could be a conflict there. And basically, there's maintenance items. And everybody should be aware of what your maintenance items are. And a lot of the inspectors will help you out with that and tell you at the inspection time what the maintenance items are. So, I'm going to turn it over to Becky.
Hey Deb, before you do that, can I ask a question?
Sure.
How do you handle your pool inspection in the middle of the winter?
Exactly.
Because I had it come up, and I'm hoping buyer's agent's not here. Didn't ask for an inspection, it's lower on the contract, but before closing, they wanted $10,000 or $15,000 put in escrow so that when May comes around, they can have it inspected. If there's a problem, there's money there to make the fix. So we said, well, wait a minute, he didn't ask for a full inspection in the first place, so no, we're not gonna escrow money. Because you kind of lose control of it at that point, and so if they say, well, full inspector said this or that, maybe it's a major problem, maybe it's a minor problem, but then you got the problem because the buyer's gonna say, I want this fixed, even though he's not entitled to have it fixed. So I guess my question is, representing a buyer, how do you protect them when it's the middle of winter? It's an education thing. You say, look, we're not gonna be able to get this inspected if we're gonna close in mid-February. So, just know that, when you try to open it up in May and, the pump doesn't work or a filter doesn't work, they're gonna understand that it's their responsibility. You can't go back to the seller.
Well, the same thing is true versus winter and summer heat versus air conditioning. I would that continually.
And
Usually that's under a home warranty.
That's where a snow.
Well, that's-
But a home warranty won't cover it if you can't prove that it
did it work, you know, that it worked at that time.
But there are home warranties that will cover pre-existing conditions.
So that there are problems.
So if you ask, and that was the pool, you know, you ask the seller to pay for that additional home warranty, and then you also have pre-existing conditions, then hopefully that will cover it.
I've had that before and they did not cover it.
I know, I wanna know what's on
We're
this.
out of hassles with
So why didn't you buy it on all of them?
Yeah. I don't wanna talk up a home warranty, but I know who I use, and here's the thing, if I'm not happy, I call the person that sold me the home warranty. Because they work for us, and believe me, I have had things worked out with them. So that is about the only thing that we can do. I'm gonna go back a few slides, I'm not gonna click it, but I want everybody to understand that on the sales contract, okay? On page 5, where they're asking for additional amendments, that is not where additional inspections go. I have seen contracts come across my desk where it will be chimney, windows, you know, all that, and then they will forget to put it on the amendments, and the amendments will override the sales contract. If you read the bottom of that amendment page, it says that it will, what's the word verbiage? It will supersede. Thank you very much. Senior moment. Okay. So that is important. You know, I'm trying to remind everybody what comes across my desk all the time. What else did we go through? Okay. You are the professional. It is your job to educate that buyer on what this inspection covers. If they are concerned about something, write it up. If you can see it, write it up on the initial repair amendment. I don't need to hire either one of these inspectors to tell me that the sidewalk is broken up, the driveway has cracks in it, the window is broken, and fuses. It can be in reasonable working order when you have fuses. The problem is it's hard to get insurance. So if you see, you go and open up the box and your buyer says, oh my gosh, no, I don't want this house. Well, let's ask the seller to update it to breakers with the offer. Negotiating things up front are going to save you. You want a happy closing, you know, and when everybody starts, well, no, I got him down a low price, the seller accepted a low price, and then you're coming on and you're just adding more and more and more. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of contracts that are being canceled because we cannot get the repair amendment resolved. So,
Hey, Becky, one other
Yes.
point, is this mic even on?
Yes.
yeah,
So, going back a few slides, but you don't have to go back.
Okay.
On the mold inspection, the slide says, check the box yes or no, okay? While I have a captive audience, always check that box yes, and don't ever write on there, only if needed, only if the inspector recommends, because now you're just opening up a can of worms. What does that really mean? You don't have to have it done, but provide your buyer with the opportunity, always check yes. I don't know any seller that's gonna refuse your offer because you wanna have a mold inspection. Because now that sends out a red flag that there might be a problem with the house if they don't want you to have it inspected. So now you've got the opportunity, if you check the box yes, and the inspector says, you know, there's a problem here, I think you ought to have somebody come in and take a look at it, whether it's a leaking roof that might be causing some issues up in the attic or in the basement. But don't ever write on there and condition your mold inspection upon what somebody else might think or say. Just check the box yes, and you've got absolute right in that event when the inspector comes back and says, look into this a little further to have that done. But you need to make sure you're within your 14 days. So if it's on the 13th day,
21.
on the mold, it's 21. So if that inspection comes back on the 14th day and you're having problems within those 7 days getting a mold inspection done, just ask for an extension, but just beware of those secondary inspections on, you need to recommend, or the inspector recommends something be looked into a little further, be aware of your timeline so that you're not getting yourself into a bind if you can't get that second inspection done.
Carol had a question.
Regarding the mold, I know they're not gonna be very popular about this, but, when I write offers and check the mold, oftentimes I get them back and they said, no air test. Wonder if you have an extremely allergic person that get in the house because we weren't allowed to do an air test and they get very sick. What is the liability? Who's telling, the sellers that they shouldn't allow an air test? Is it the filter, is it the sellers? I'm a little confused by that, because many offers I get back say, you can do a swab only or a visual only, but you cannot do an air test. So legally, what's the liability there? If you tell a buyer they can't get an air test on a mold, you can do the visual, but
My guess is that the listing agent is telling their seller to limit the mold inspection. But the buyer's asking for it, and the buyer can say, no, don't want my mold inspection to be limited in any way. Because let the expert determine what he's gonna do. So you kind of push back from the buyer's point, so I don't want you, seller, to limit what I want to do as far as mold. And that solves it. In my opinion, is the seller really gonna say that, well then, I'm not gonna let you do that, and the deal falls apart? I doubt it. I suppose it could happen, but if I'm a buyer, a buyer's agent, I'm gonna push back and say, I don't want you to limit the tests that I want. And if you are, then I want out of the contract and give my earnest money back.
Janet,
Jim, what would you recommend if they do not ask for a mold test, but the inspector sees what they think is mold, and they call it out as mold? Then your seller is obligated. What's your opinion on that?
What do you mean your seller's obligated to do what?
Well, then the buyer comes back and says they want it mitigated, even though they didn't ask for it, because the inspector has called it out.
But I don't know that the inspector has really called it out. I think he's just questioned possibly the presence of mold somewhere.
No, he specifically said it was mold.
Is he a mold tester?
How can you look
I've had it happen twice.
Okay, well, still, under your contract, though, the buyer has not conditioned his offer and his obligations to go through based on a mold test. So the only thing you're dealing with now is an inspection amendment that deals with electrical, plumbing, heating, and air. And from the seller's point of view, I'm gonna say, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna remediate mold. If it appears to be a major issue, I suppose. If it's something minor, maybe I'll do it. It just matter of taking some bleach and cleaning an area, but the seller's not obligated if the buyer has not asked for a mold inspection, regardless of what the inspector says. So I suppose if you're still within your time frames, you can go back and ask for a mold inspection, but the seller doesn't have to do that. But I think if you check that box no on the mold inspection, I think you're stuck as a buyer.
So then, if the inspector calls out mold and the sellers know it, then, but he's not a licensed mold inspector, will the sellers have to disclose if that deal fell through?
Not necessarily. If the seller is not aware of an actual problem that rises to the level of being a material defect, then I don't think that automatically requires a seller to update their disclosures. There might be some dispute.
Even though the inspector called it, but if he's not a licensed mold inspector.
I think it's gonna depend on what the actual condition is. Just because the home inspector calls it out, even though he's not an expert, there might be an obvious mold problem. So I think it really depends on the extent of the mold condition and whether that's something the seller now has to disclose. I mean, because honestly, every home probably has mold, right? Is there any dispute about that? So if you're looking in, and it's gonna be in the bathroom, it's gonna be in the shower, it's gonna be in the tub, or whatever, or in the sink. So what was the extent of the mold that was pointed out by the inspector? That's gonna really trigger whether a seller has a duty to now disclose.
For further discussion, probably another time, is there an option of putting in the mold amendment a yes or no, or an option which test they will be doing, whether it's air or swab?
No, that's all in your contract.
Some realtors and managing brokers are of the opinion that the air tests are not legitimate. And they have several reasons why that's so, and it's killed deals for me. So could there be an option so the seller knows, yeah, they're gonna do a swab, or yeah, they're gonna do air, or we're gonna do both?
Well, no, it just says, yes, I'm gonna have a mold inspection. And that opens the door to any kind of inspection I want as a buyer. So I'm not gonna condition it on a swab test or an air test. And you know what, I'd be very reluctant to be advising either you or me to be giving any advice upon what's an appropriate test, because I'm not a mold expert, and I kind of doubt anybody here is a mold expert. So I don't know that I'd be advising anybody to say, you know what, just have a swab test done, or just have an air test done, unless you guys are truly an expert in the area. I don't know that I would give any of that advice to either a buyer or a seller.
Well, and here's the thing, we know when agents started writing that up, swab only, okay. The quacks like a duck, it's a duck, all right? So now it is a swab. But for those that are highly allergic, what is the extent, with the air test? So just say yes and have the professionals. Now, when these inspectors point out suspicious possible mold, you have to go ahead and have that tested. You can't just turn in that report because of what they say unless they go that extra step and have it inspected, and then which will bring on the estimates from all these mold remediators that are out there now. Does that, you just can't, you have to go. And that's why they made that mold inspection 21 days. That was him. 7 days, so that if the inspector does not find any signs of mold, that it is a clean house, no water, then your buyer has the opportunity to waive it. Now, make sure that you waive it, because a lender, when they see that you have asked for a mold inspection or a radon inspection, they're going to want that report. Does that make sense? So you need to have some type of waiver to show the lender that, no, we didn't have that. There are, okay.
Wouldn't a visual mold count?
No.
No.
No, you have to test it.
No, I'm saying if they visually look and they don't see any reason, wouldn't that suffice for your mold test?
For your
mold inspection? You know, I agree, I'm all for you shouldn't limit it, but if they've already said, we see those.
Well, but are you writing that in on the contract?
No.
Oh, no, okay.
I'm saying for a
Yes.
lender.
Yes.
And to have it weighed.
Well,
Because if they do a visual, you're not still not.
And here's the thing, if you have not asked for a mold inspection and you're doing a government loan, and the appraiser goes in there, they're gonna call that, if they see mold, they're calling that mold. And they're gonna want it remediated, or you're not gonna be closing. Okay, mold is another class, all by itself, because it has just become a really, issue. The state of Illinois the Illinois Realtor has taken the mold off the website. They're not using the mold notice anymore. They're not using the mold disclosure anymore, because there's no levels of what is dangerous. That's the problem. Tracy?
So my question is, I think the issue seems to be is that we're protecting our sellers from having to disclose a mold issue if they do like an air test. And I have heard the same thing, like if you live by a lake, you might have a worse air test. But my question is, if the sellers don't have any disclosure, then that deal falls apart, but they don't really have anything to disclose to the next buyer, correct? Because there is no mold disclosure now for them to fill out.
That's a good point.
No, you're saying.
There's no mold disclosure, and there is no mold on the seller's disclosure. And we talked about this in our very first class that we met. And I asked Jim, I said, okay, there's no place on the disclosure to disclose the fact that the deal fell apart because of mold. So his answer, if you remember right, answer was, if the mold has been so severe that it has damaged walls, roofs, structural, then it would need to be disclosed. So in other words, if you have a wall that needs to be replaced because of mold, then that probably would have to be disclosed, correct? I mean, if it falls into the categories
That's structural damage.
of the sellers,
Potentially structural damage if it's severe enough.
if it's severe enough. Cheryl?
Two things. One, I know a situation where a seller covered up walls in the basement, so they wouldn't visually see any mold.
Right.
Or your error test would have found that situation. So don't rely on just thinking you have to see it. The other one is, we as listing agents, if you know there's a latent defect, we now have to disclose it, whether it's on
That is
the
correct.
disclose it form or not. You just, in writing, to the other person, you have to cover your, you know, you've got to cover your bases too.
Becky, can you repeat that for the live feed, please?
If, as an agent, if you know that there is a mold issue, then you need to disclose it. That's the code of ethics, that you need to disclose any latent. The other one is, people have covered up mold so it wouldn't be visual. So, of course, the air test. Okay, well, let's move on. Like I said, this could be a whole class on it. Now, when you're seeing that I want to talk about, does everybody know the timeline that's in Transaction Desk? And everybody knows the timelines for the inspections and when it has to be turned in. And when you turn in, let me see, recap. Okay. Our sales contract says time is of the essence, okay? Make sure that you are getting these done in time. A seller, if you see that they're not being done in time, get an extension. But keep in mind that a seller does not have to agree to an extension. I had a situation come up this morning that they did not agree to an extension because they've got a backup offer. And there's not much you can do about that. So, also keep in mind, and I get this question, you've got 14 days from the accepted offer to turn in the repair amendment along with the whole inspection report. And, okay, wait a minute, I just had where was I going with this? Oh yeah. From the time you turn it in, 10 days. Let's say that you get it turned in 10 days. I mean, time is of the essence, you got a 30-day close, let's move it. Your 5 days to remedy starts on that 10th day. You don't get 14 days and then 5 days, you know, and then 2 days. No. 2 days. And also, if your 5 days is up, you've negotiated. Now you can get an extension on the remedy. A buyer has to decide within 2 days on whether he's going to terminate this contract or not. I don't care if emails are going back and forth between you and that listing agent and you think, oh, he's so nice and we're working on this, and then all of a sudden, well, I'm not going to close because we couldn't come to an agreement. Your 2 days passed a week ago. So now that nice agent said, well, we're not in contract. Does that make sense? You are representing your buyer. Make sure that decision is made 2 days after that 5 days, wherever that ends up, 10, 5, 2, 8, 5, 2. And the reason for that 5 days is so that you, which is going to bring me on to my next slide. What did I do with that? Oh. It's like I'm at home. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, well, we're gonna go back. Okay. I'll jump back to what I was, my train of thought. All right, so the repair amendment. Now, we all know that we've got a seller that's qualified to do the repairs. Our repair amendment says it needs to be a qualified contractor. There are some buyers out there that really all they want done is the repairs. So they're going to be really easy buyers to work with. But then you're going to have that engineer that's going to want every single thing done by a contractor, And he's going to want to pick that contractor, because that's what our contract says, what and by whom, which I hated that you added that, but anyway. You didn't ask my opinion on that, but you know. So if your seller can do the repairs, I mean, it's simple things, like covered junction boxes. You know, somebody may be able to do a GFI. Somebody may be, you would probably get more done on the repair amendment if you allow the seller to do these things. He just doesn't want to have to pay a contractor to do it. But if you negotiate that out, make sure you indicate on that repair amendment that the seller is going to do it. Just write it in, seller will do himself, have everybody initial. So that that buyer is not inspecting invoices at the time of closing. Everything is negotiable. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
What if you have the seller do the repairs, and it's an electrical repair? They move in and a week later, the house catches on fire, who's liable? And it's electrical. Should not have been, it should have been a qualified electrician, correct? To
Well,
protect
you're
him.
asking a couple of different questions.
Yeah.
The house actually burns down because the seller negligently repaired an electrical, then the seller might have some liability there because he took that obligation on himself to do it. Your other question, though, I think what you meant to ask, though, is if the electrical's just not working right. And he just kind of botched it and didn't wire it correctly, and it's a week after closing. I think the buyer's stuck. Because if the buyer agreed to allow the seller to do that, which maybe they shouldn't have done that unless the seller's a licensed electrician, I don't think the buyer can come back on the seller at that point. Because it's the date of possession, they should have checked all the electrical at the date of possession, and then have their 2 days or whatever to give a notice that it's not working.
The 5 days that we have, I don't even get my response from the agent until the fifth day, you know, that afternoon. Do we need to get an extension of that? I think a lot of
The response from the agent on what?
on the repair amendment, you know, and so the buyer has 2 days to decide if that's, what if we want to negotiate? What they've come back with, we need to get an extension on that
Yes.
5 days.
Yes.
But a lot of agents, I think, don't realize
So-
that we need to.
Okay, let me clarify. So you received a repair amendment. Your seller has sent it back saying what he will do and what he won't do
On the 5th day.
on the 5th day.
Yeah,
Well-
5 o'clock in the afternoon, yeah.
Yeah, well, that is hard for a buyer to look at it and make the decision. Yes, then you need to get a remedy. And, I mean, you need to extend for the remedy, okay?
I think some agents think that that's okay though, because the last one that I had said, well, you know, that was within 5 days. Well, 5 days is talking about a good day.
Right.
It's not gonna work. Just like there's repairs that need to be negotiated. We just have to-
Well, I know there's a problem with roofs right now.
Oh.
Major problem. They're trying to get somebody out there to look at a roof, you know? So it's,
Well, so one question we had talked about this months ago, but when it comes to the 5-day window, again, once we get the estimates back, if it does run into day 4 or 5, we send out our response. It is after so whether it's day 4, the buyer agent has 2 days
That's correct.
thereafter. So really,
Yep.
in extension, they still get a 2-day window. So if the buyer agent thinks that it may take some more time if they want to get second bids, et cetera, shouldn't they be the ones to send us as the listing agent and the seller an extension to extend that out?
oh, yes, yes. For them to give you an answer, whoever needs to respond
Right.
next is the one that should get the extension. So, I know,
Or we could
it's,
be in trouble if one of,
Go ahead,
one
Bonnie.
of the others won't extend. That is the
Right.
problem.
yeah, they won't extend, I know, we're kind of at their mercy.
And it is, again, Saturday and Sunday, it's hard to get people out there to look at things. You It goes to Tuesday
Correct.
on the repair note.
And the remedy and everything. The only thing that doesn't cover is the contract and counter.
That's a little.
Yeah. They count, but if it lands on that day,
Lands on that.
then you get the next business day.
Where does it say that on the amendment?
Date of performance.
Date of go ahead. Performance. Do you see it now? You see where it says, you have to revert back to that paragraph that's on the contract, the sales contract, that says how that's handled. Okay, I'm gonna have, hey Cheryl, will you stand up and explain how we added that for large items, consider getting a lien waiver and the reasoning behind that? Go ahead, Cheryl, stand up. Yeah, because we've never done it before.
Yeah, well, if you look on your,
It's on the bottom of the repair amendment.
Talking about the signatures under general.
Yeah.
we don't have the inspector here.
No, we don't have
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
So if you look on the regular repair amendment, and it's on, the language is also on the inspection repair amendment, in lines 18 through 20, it says the seller shall furnish to buyer at or prior to closing affidavits, lien waivers, or paid invoices to demonstrate it will not be subject to liens under Illinois Mechanics Lien Act. So now is your pre-license question. How long does someone have to file a lien on a property for work they haven't been paid for? How many? Jim, what's the right answer?
Depends who you are, if you're a subcontractor or general contractor. A lot of people think it's 90 days, some that say 4 months.
Yeah.
Depending on who the person is doing the work.
So typically it could be, like we said, 90 days to 4 months after the work has been completed. So let's say right now, a lot of you are getting roofs done on your properties with insurance claims, etc. What are you getting to make sure the materials have been paid for, the contractors for sure have been paid for? You know, if you pay it at closing, you know for sure it's been taken care of, but are you getting lien waivers from all of those to make sure later on a lien doesn't show up on that property? And I think we've been very casual about those things in the past.
Okay. Did somebody do that? Well, we're gonna move on because we want to hear from our inspector and we got other questions. Okay, I just want to quickly go over credit in lieu of repairs. You will see that a lot, the seller will just say, I'm gonna give you X amount of dollars for all the repairs, all right? Now, representing the buyer, you want to make sure that that credit is going to cover all the repairs that that person has asked for. Somebody needs to obtain the bids, okay? So once the bids, then you can negotiate the amount of money that you're willing to accept. Invoices, once you receive those bids, the invoices can be put on the seller's side of the closing disclosure. So in other words, I get a bid from Jim Huff to do some work. I get a bid from Joe Rea. I take that bid and I give it to the title company and they're only going to put it on the seller's side, and then they write the check out to them and the buyer will hand it to them after the work is done. That way they guarantee, they know that the work is done, that it's being done correctly. We had a deal like that, remember? Okay, so there's one way, and I have talked to a couple lenders and they agree that this is the way it should be done. If your buyer has not asked for closing costs, they can put the credit for closing costs. That will save them the money that they need to bring to closing. That's going to have the most effect on their bottom dollar. the sales price can be reduced, but that doesn't have as much of an effect on the amount of money. So these are three choices. You cannot go to closing and the seller cannot hand a check to that buyer. That is fraud. But as long as the bank knows that these things are being paid for on the seller side, they don't have an issue with it. It's being done. Okay? All right, let me see if we get, oh, now we get to talk to the inspectors.
Hey, Beth, can you back up and
Yeah.
explain if you renegotiate that, how you handle that?
Renegotiate.
Just renegotiate closing costs. There were. If I write up a contract on my finance amendment and I put no closing costs.
You're going, the lender is probably gonna want you to change the finance amendment.
Right.
And that, you just redo the front page of the finance amendment where you're adding the closing costs and send it into the lender.
You don't redo it, you put it in there and have everybody.
And, yep, and have an initial, sorry. That's an easy,
So
that's
make-
easy.
Make sure you're running it by the lender.
Yes.
Provided their approval
Some
is
lenders
how it
might be a
shows.
little different.
They might require that the work actually be done and paid for, shown on the settlement statement. They don't want just closing cost credit. Might be so significant that they want that work actually done. So make sure the lender's on board with however you're gonna handle it.
If you submit a repair amendment with the offer, on page 5, if you circle repair, that lender wants that repair amendment. So the things that you write up there will need to be done. The lender will want those things done on that. So far, I think there's been a couple cases where lenders have asked for the whole house inspection. Has anybody? Yeah. That's not gonna be fun.
The
So,
underwriters.
yeah. Okay. We're gonna move on to the inspector. Save your questions for the end. Okay. I'll ask you guys the questions. Per license requirements, what items do you have to include on reports? Either one. Craig? Cameron?
What items have to be on?
Have to be on the report.
Gas shut-offs are required, water shut-offs are required. Yeah, anything safety related, whether it be electrical or a trip hazard or anything like that, has to be marked down.
Yeah, the state actually is pretty flexible in how they describe in the state standard of practice what we have to do. They regulate certain things if we do them, but officially, kind of like what Craig was saying, is that it's actually a pretty short list of things that are mandated to be on the report. When we do report on certain things though, like electrical, heating, air conditioning, plumbing, foundation, framing, roofing, that's when the state jumps in and says, okay, now when you do those things, you have to do them a certain way. So they don't limit us as to what we put on reports necessarily, so we can go beyond obviously the standard of practice, but when we do certain items, they do describe how we're supposed to inspect those. And those are the big things, the things that fall into your repair amendment categories as well. So that's what we tend to emphasize and would say is more important.
Sorry, guys. Okay, tell me, what is it, do you have to point out deferred expenses? I know that there are some that you make a note that the components have outlived their life expectancy. I'm not sure.
The furnace needs replaced in 5 years. or 3
Exactly.
years, or the roof needs replacement in a couple of years, but it's currently functioning fine. Do you have to point that out to the buyer? Are you obligated, or is that just a courtesy that you provide them?
Yeah, she just says ethically or morally. I honestly, I would say, I'd have to change the name of my company. If I didn't at least mention to somebody, because honestly, buyers can be very ignorant about what they're actually getting. And I don't want them to call me a month later and say, my furnace is 40 years old, and you didn't say anything about that. Regardless of whether I'm actually obligated, who wants the callback? Who wants to deal with the callback? Because that does cost time and potentially money if they then go and start writing angry reviews somewhere. So sometimes it's the buyer themselves and their response to, and honestly, their perhaps bad expectations that may drive what we put on the report. The best way that I found to do it is to simply say, listen, the item is in functioning, or I'll even use the term that's on your contracts, it is in reasonable working order, but it is beyond its expected life per like what the manufacturer would suggest, so start saving money to replace it someday. And verbally, I might tell them it might go another 5 minutes or another 5 years. You never know. Some of the older ones actually would probably go even longer. So yeah, I personally feel like ethically I have to say something if I know it's, you know, really, really old, and they may get, you know, hit with something in the next 5 years. But it shouldn't be made into an item that is a repair suggestion, because that's not what it is if it's in functioning order.
So Cam mentioned the word expectations. Right here is where you set your buyer expectations. I think it's an educational thing. If you tell your buyer, we're gonna have an inspection, here's what it's gonna cover, but here's what it doesn't cover. So if you'll, roof is aging, the furnace is aging, if it's in working order, let your buyers know before the inspection even takes place that, you know, we're not entitled to ask the, well, you can always ask the seller, but you're not gonna be able to require the seller to replace anything that's in reasonable working order. So you set their expectations early up front before the inspection ever takes place, so when they get that report back and it says, you know, it's in reasonable working order, but it's exceeded its life expectancy, they understand that you can't make the seller replace that furnace.
And I have a letter that goes at the beginning of every report, and I'm happy to send that to you. You can see what it is that I tell the buyers regarding those issues. The fact that not everything on the report is necessarily actionable. You have to talk to your agent to find out what contractually you can even do. Don't ask me, what can I ask for? That's not my job. And also the fact that there's maintenance items that are on there that simply do not matter. They're just not something that is significant enough that you shouldn't raise your alarm and your anxiety level. And then also, one other thing that I forgot. But anyway, if you want that letter, you can actually email me or contact me, and I can show you that. I think it's a good way of show that to them when you're in the process of looking at a house to get their expectations start to be set. Because people come into the home inspection often thinking the sky's the limit, and whatever he says, he's the expert. We are not the expert. We're the person that knows a whole lot about a whole lot of stuff, but we don't know everything about any one thing. And so we're going to refer them to the experts, and that's where they're going to get their absolute answer in the end. So they come in thinking that we're the expert, and they might end up trying to put our opinion more heavily weighted over that of the actual expert, and they really shouldn't do that.
On a lot of reports, we see that you call out further evaluations. A lot. Not you personally, but we see that a lot.
Well, the biggest thing there is our liability that can take place if we don't recommend a qualified or a licensed. I quit using the licensed term just because there was a lot of different reaction to that, but we have to watch out for ourselves as far as what we report, and if there is a furnace issue, you just recommend that a qualified technician look at it or whatever. But there's just a lot of things that you want further evaluation on, just to watch out for the buyer and what they're buying, so they know, so they're aware of it.
And everybody understands that further evaluations are at the expense of the buyer, because that is basically an additional inspection. So if you're having your inspection on day 14, it will probably be pretty hard to get a furnace person out there, or a roofer. Well, roofer, you forget it. But what I, in my previous meetings, have said to the inspectors, isn't there something wrong with it that would allow you, as the buyer's agent, to put something down on that repair amendment? Then the seller has to hire a licensed contractor to come out and look at it.
Yeah, and I think
But
that,
if you don't say anything wrong with it, and you just say, I want somebody else to come out and take a look at it,
yeah,
it's on the
and
buyer.
according to the state regulations on standard of practice for what we have to report on, it specifically says that we have to report the reason the item is significantly deficient. I think in the area of referrals for further evaluation, it is absolutely fair for agents and clients to expect to have on there, what's the reason for why you're saying, get somebody to look at this. It makes no sense to just try and cover yourself and be like, hey, further evaluation on everything, carte blanche. So you should expect that, and if you don't see it on there, I would call your inspector right away and say, listen, we saw this, could you just tell me what the actual issue is? Do you have a photo? Do you have a comment? You can specify what that is. A totally reasonable expectation, and typically that is, when we were talking about that during the meetings we had before this, that was the general consensus, is that usually we're going to have something on there that's important enough that would call for, but it may be something that we just aren't certain about, that would call for further evaluation. And that's the reason for actually doing that, not just to cover your own hind end.
Right.
Becky, can I ask a question?
Yes.
What right does a buyer have to further inspection under the contract, though? Have you ever had your sellers push back and say, you know what, they had their inspection, I'm not gonna let the plumbing guy come in, I'm not gonna let the furnace guy come in, and another electrician come in and have 6 more inspections? If they had their inspection under the amendment, have you ever had sellers that refuse to allow any further inspections? And how do you handle that? Because the contract says the buyer can have an inspection, and I think the seller technically under the contract is right in saying, you had your inspection, and because he says, well, you might want to have it checked further, from a seller's perspective, I think the seller can push back and say, you had your inspection, and if he didn't point out anything specifically defective about the furnace or whatever it is, I don't know that a buyer really has the right to ask for more.
Go ahead.
That was along the lines of the question that I was about to ask, because if a house has a fireplace and it has a chimney, often the inspector will say further evaluation by a chimney specialist. I mean, that is something that a buyer's agent should have put as an additional inspection.
Right.
They know there's a fireplace, they know there's a chimney, if they wanted it inspected, it should go on the initial offer. There shouldn't be any reason for a seller to allow a buyer to come in later and do a chimney inspection.
That's pretty clear, buyer's
That's
not
clear.
looking there, but if you guys say, you know what, I've got a question about the furnace, I'm just not sure, you know, whether it's working properly or not, you ought to have a licensed HVAC contractor come out. I think there's a gray area there as to whether a buyer can actually have that contractor, the expert in heating and cooling, come out to take a look at it.
Do you think it's as gray an area if the inspector said the reason why is because it's continuing to light shut off, light shut off, light shut off? There's something wrong there. We know that's not.
That's a repair.
Yeah, and so in that instance, that's exactly why I think it's so important that what we're talking about, that you have to have something on there that is the reason for the further evaluation.
Yeah, something that's potentially defective.
Correct.
It can't just be, I got a twitch in my leg that makes me, nervous
Right.
about this.
I've never seen that before. Never
However,
seen it done
yeah,
like that way.
Yeah,
I think we'll fix that problem by changing the amendment to allow for inspections, so that's unlimited inspections in your 14 days.
Okay, Leslie.
Well, I also think that it's advantageous for sellers in some regard. I've had a further evaluation on a furnace, and it came back that the person said, oh no, it's fine, it's not a big deal, this is what we just needed to do. So the seller didn't have to make that costly repair, it was fine once they had it further evaluated. So, I don't know, I think for the sellers, to answer your question, you know, it just kind of depends on the issue at hand. If the further evaluation is going to be, you know, it saved the sellers the cost of potentially doing XYZ to have the buyers pay for somebody to come out and say, oh no, it's not a big deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but how often though does that happen? As opposed to a
Right, but I'm just saying it has
contractor coming
happened.
out and saying, you know what, I need to put in a whole new furnace for you, because I wanna make 10 grand on that deal.
Yeah.
Not often are they gonna come out and say, you know what, I think it's fine.
Melissa?
Okay, so just to clarify, if the home inspector does recommend further evaluation, let's say for electrical, because I ran into this recently, and he specifies why, and they're legitimate, like, concerns, then can you then put it on a repair amendment that you want it evaluated because of, or you're saying it still falls on the buyer to get a further evaluation?
If you can put what he believes is wrong,
Okay,
that's what you put on the repair amendment. The seller has to call a contractor, a licensed contractor. You're not going to negotiate the seller doing that repair.
right.
So you're gonna negotiate that a licensed contractor, I know what Jim is saying, that they may come out and go, well, it needs a new panel and, you know, but you gotta give something wrong with it, not just an evaluation, you know? Mark, did you have a question back there? Or did it get answered? Okay. Per license requirements, do items not up to code need to be reported? To the inspectors. Go ahead, Cameron. Oh, you want Craig to answer that one?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Again, not really addressed in the standard of practice, but especially like on a new house, if there's something we know is not done correctly, a good example is energy efficiency rules. We have had that over the last, since 2013 was when it came into effect, at least the more significant ones. I think they were in effect in 2010 as well, but there's now a bunch of requirements in how the ductwork is installed, how things are insulated, and how that's even documented. For several years after 2013, January 1st, there were many homes that were new homes that were built without those requirements being met. That's a state mandate. It's not a local code that has to be adopted. It's a state mandate, and so when we would find that and call it out, it is absolutely based on whether or not, whether it's up to code, but we're not code enforcers, and so that's not why we're calling it out. We're calling it out because code just happens to be one of the other standards that we use. We use manufacturer's instructions, we use our own opinion about what might be safe or what might not be safe. We use standard construction techniques in the area because there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. So a lot of that stuff may come into play. Code is not a requirement, but it's absolutely something that informs what we write about.
Along with carbon monoxide and smoke detectors.
I have on the live feed from Chris Merrick commented, the seller does not have to have anything fixed or evaluated. It is negotiable.
That's true.
It's always negotiable.
It's always negotiable.
I'm just sharing.
Mark?
You have one question. One
Yes.
thing that's not mentioned in the contract or amendments anywhere is safety related items. And a lot of times we see that come up on inspections. or
Yeah,
remediation.
and you know what? That is a question that we've got, right there. So, oopsie. Okay. We're gonna get to that.
I would add this though, that I wouldn't encourage any inspector, if there happens to be any listening, I just wouldn't encourage inspectors to ever say something's not up to code, because in doing so, you put some liability on yourself and you put on the hat of being a code enforcer, and you're not. That's not what we are, so.
Well, you know what? I really hope they are listening,
Yeah.
because, I mean, I can't count the number of inspections that will show 1950 houses that aren't up to code, you know? I mean, it's not code. Well, no, it wasn't code back when they built the house, you know? Granted, if there is something wrong with the house that needs repaired today, they have to go by the code that is enforceable today.
Yeah,
But you don't have to, well, that's Jim's thing.
and like Craig was saying about like smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, that's obviously something that many houses were not built before, were built before those standards were put into place. But from a home inspector standpoint, again, we have to report on things that might be a safety issue. In fact, I don't know if you know this or not, but we actually are mandated by the state to tell the sellers if there are potential safety issues in their home. Now, I think that needs to be things that are elevated to, you know, a greater, live wires that are sticking out of their wall or something in their little baby's room, right at mouth level. That would be a hazard. And so we actually are mandated to tell the sellers about any safety-related issues that would be significant. So we might call out smoke detectors and smoke alarms. Hopefully, we're writing it in such a way that again says, hey, here's an upgrade you really should make because it is a safety thing. GFCIs around kitchens. Again, those are really upgrades. It behooves us to not write those as repairs because again, they're really not repairs.
But if it's an FHA loan, it would be a repair.
Yeah, I'll FHA.
It would be that.
I'm on tape, so I'm not going to say anything, but
Okay.
yeah, they have their thing. They have their way of doing things.
All right. These are some frequently asked questions that have come up. What is, and Jim, I think we talked about that in one of the meetings. What is considered material structural damage? Our decks? If an inspector finds something wrong with the deck, is that considered material structural damage?
Well, your contract talks about attached improvements to the residence. I suppose if the deck is attached to the house.
Yep.
And it's deteriorated to the point where somebody's gonna step right through it, that is material structural damage that I think a buyer can request to be repaired.
Okay. What about siding? Like the weed whacker?
Or the hail damage.
Well, that's insurance. But a weed whacker.
No, not, no, Bobby, go ahead.
Okay.
But what, okay, this is what I'm thinking here, is like, what you're saying is, they don't have to do any further evaluation. What if a roof has hail damage and it's not leaking? That's a gray area coming up that we're seeing a lot. And we're seeing hail damage on gutters, on siding.
I don't think the seller has any obligation to repair hail damage. If there's not a leak in the roof, then it's performing its intended function. Siding's the same way. If you got hail damage, I back into my siding with my mower before, so I got.
Yeah, the weed whacker, it does a hole in the.
That's not material structural damage.
Okay.
Karen, do you report that if you see that?
Hail damage on what? On siding?
Siding the roof?
On the roof, yeah, absolutely, because it depends on the age of the roof as to how bad that might actually be in the near future. But siding, again, it's like you're saying, it's cosmetic. Siding is cosmetic, but it may be great enough that it might necessitate calling it out, pointing it out. I mean, it's pretty obvious. If it's so bad that we would call it out, it's got to be bad enough that they probably would have seen it during any kind of a walkthrough as well. But regardless, we write it up.
Not on the roof, right. Right.
Yeah,
So-
not on the roof, on siding I was talking about.
So again,
Eventually, it could be a moisture problem.
Right.
And it could be an immediate one if the house is old enough, doesn't have house wrap or something like that, it's just wood behind it, you know?
so siding is something that you see when you're walking around the house and, that you could ask for on an initial repair amendment and negotiate that out up front. Good luck on matching the color if it's faded, but, safety
You could always hire
issues.
us to do a walkthrough, during the.
And sellers can have an inspection before they list the house to see what they're dealing with, Safety issues. Jim, can you talk about safety issues a little bit? I believe in one of our previous meetings, you said that if the safety issues pertain to the electrical, plumbing, that falls into those categories.
Well, yeah, because that would be a material defect if the electrical, like Cam said, if the wire sticking out, obviously that's a defect.
Right.
Talking about safety issues, and Mark's probably thinking along the same lines, it's a handrail going down to the basement. You pointed out, that's a safety issue, or your stairs are too narrow, because it was built 100 years ago. You've got narrow steps, where you've got very, the tread depths are so, well, that would be narrow, but if they're too high, too low. Those are safety issues that would not necessarily be covered by your contract, because they're not material structural defects. So I don't think the seller's obligated to install that handrail. They might want to for the $50 it's gonna cost to do that. But depending on the safety issue, I don't think the seller's obligated cover everything under the sun that's pointed out as a potential hazard.
A common one is the balusters, is that what you call them? The balusters on a deck when they're not, that a child can get, I've seen that written up, that they want all that, you know, fixed because it's too wide and a child can get his head caught. That's a safety, they call that a safety issue.
Yeah.
Okay,
Safety's a fairly broad term that can be applied pretty relatively. So from a home inspector standpoint, we do have to write up safety issues. In fact, that's half of the definition according to the state of what constitutes something that is significantly deficient, which is the term that they use. You guys have in reasonable working order, we have significantly deficient. And half of that definition is if the item is unsafe. But the state doesn't give us any guidance whatsoever really as to how to necessarily apply that. Handrails would really probably fall in the category of just a recommended upgrade if grandma's moving in, or an idiot, I don't know, somebody that would trip down the stairs a lot. But from our standpoint, yes, it's a minor maintenance upgrade thing.
I have a question from the live feed from Shannon Funner. What about decks that weren't built to code, not attached correctly? Is water intrusion an issue for siding with holes in it?
that's,
Is that two different questions?
yeah.
Yeah. From the deck standpoint, again, it's really again a recommended upgrade, but there might be decks that are built so poorly. You know, Bob and Bill came over and had some beer, then built the deck. That would be something that we would probably call out. So it's very relative to what we find that day. If the deck looks like it was built in 1980, but it was built to 1980 specifications, then personally I'm going to probably say there's ways you can improve this, because decks do, you know, attachments are the thing that generally fail on a deck, and that's what makes them dangerous. So here's some improvements you could make, and then it's really in their court. They have to decide whether or not. But I don't write that up as a repair, because it's not necessarily a repair if you're just suggesting improving the functionality of the deck to extend its life.
What about the water intrusion? Did you write that up?
Oh, water intrusion, I might actually look for it depending on if there's damage, but a lot of times the damage that we're talking about, like your mower, probably down on the lower levels of siding, wasn't it? Or no, unless you shoot a rock out of there and fire it up a few feet. Normally that's probably gonna, even so, it's not gonna be made into it's not a big deal, because unless it's been there for decades and, you know, there happens to be, because there's not an enormous amount of water that's gonna come in a small hole on the side of a house. Unless you've got something directing water to that specific area.
Okay. Kind of go back to bring it up to code. I mean, just to, no, that's a question for you, Jim.
Oh.
Well, septic needs to be brought up to code.
Septic needs to be brought up to code if one of the components, major components, has failed. So if the tank, if everything is working appropriately, but the tank is undersized because they've changed the code, but it's still working and it's still functioning properly, the seller does not have to put in a larger tank. It's when it fails. When it fails, the whole system needs to be brought up to code. Does everybody understand that? Tazewell County is the same way. It has to, one part has to fail. Now, they will allow you to make repairs. So when you go in and it's baffles or it's the pipes. I'm not, you know, I should know all the terms since I spent so much, risers, thank you. Since I spent so much time doing this ordinance. And Tazewell County asked us to help them with their ordinance after Peoria got theirs done, okay? So, and there are some, because of the changes in code, you probably will run into some problems that the yards are not big enough to put in the system that they had first put in. So it can be pretty costly. That I would strongly suggest that a seller has inspected before they put it on the market. Because you are talking quite a bit of money. Jim, anything to add?
Yeah, let me just read the contract, because that's what you always have to go back to. It says if the inspections for either the well or septic reveal that the system is defective, inadequate, or unacceptable under applicable health codes, then buyer shall submit written repair amendment with the report attached. And then if you look above, the inspection, the purpose of the inspection is to determine if it is properly functioning, is adequate for the disposal of waste from the premises, and does not require changes under applicable health codes. So let me ask the question, if it's functioning properly, the septic, but it's undersized for the house, because the builder cut some corners, wanted to pay a little less for the permit, so he said, well, this is only 3-bedroom when it was really 4 or 5 bedrooms, which will then impact the size of the septic system you put in. It's functioning fine, but technically, it's not up to code, because the builder cut some corners. Does the seller have to then bring that up to code?
The county is saying they do not have to bring it up to code. They get all the reports from these inspectors. They get them. If a county had a problem with it, they would tell them that they need to do that. It's unfortunate that code has to go by the size of the house, when in actuality, the functionality goes on the number of people that are living in the house. So if you have an undersized tank, that means that you just have to get it pumped. Go ahead, Cheryl. Pumped more often.
Well, the other piece of the builders, but what I see is the house was really built as 3 bedrooms, and the people finished off the basement and added a 4th bedroom. And now it's a 4-bedroom house, when the original house was only a 3-bedroom. And that's what we run into a lot. It was done right at the beginning, but now it's an undersized tank.
Well, and what Jim's saying is, yeah, code doesn't say that, but the contract is saying that if it's not meeting, what does it say?
If it's unacceptable under applicable health codes. So if the county does though say, that wait a minute, you've got 5, because it depends on the number of plumbing fixtures. It's the sinks, it's the bathroom fixture, the plumbing, the baths, showers, how much water is going in through that system. So if the county does come back and say, wait a minute, builder, you applied for a permit for a 3-bedroom home, you put in 5 bedrooms, 5 baths, when we thought it was 3 bedrooms, 3 baths. And the county says, that house is not up to code. But it works fine, everything works fine. I think the buyer is entitled to request, seller obviously is not required to do anything, but a buyer can ask for it. And I think the buyer might have a way out if it's that big of an issue to them, and if the seller's not willing to bring it up to code, if it's a well and septic issue.
Because I don't think they'll give them occupancy anyway if they don't.
Well, that occupancy permit was given years ago when they first moved in and built it.
T.
Hey, Becky, can you come to the point then that your lenders get a copy of those reports?
Yes.
And sometimes your financing will be turned down, even if the county says it's okay and it doesn't have to be brought up to code. You might face with your financing then that, hey, it says it's not large enough, for the amount of bedrooms. And just like Cheryl was saying, they might finish off the basement later, and let's say they're using that basement and a room in the basement as an office, and they set the closet in there for storage. That's, because I tried to thinking I could get around. We referred to the house as 3 bedrooms on the main floor. That basement, had a finished room, but they did not use it as a bedroom. So I tried to show them the MLS, hey, it's advertised as 3-bedroom home. Caswell County didn't care because there was a room in the basement with a closet. They considered it that didn't have a ceiling, didn't have a floor cover. They didn't care. It was in the basement and it had a closet. Caswell County said it could be used as a bedroom, and then that's how their sizing saying what the size changed.
And so did Tazewell County want it?
They wanted it.
So it had to be, yes, they had to put, now they didn't have to put in a whole new system, but they had to add an additional, whatever size tank to make it be that total.
Was it functioning?
It was functioning, yes.
Yes.
But
I understand what they're saying, because it says it's adequate. Well, whether it's code or not, as my buyer, if it's not adequately sized for the house at this time, I'm gonna ask you to upgrade it.
That's correct.
But it is, a lot of times, they went and finished the basement and added 2 bedrooms, and now it's really undersized. And I understand what you're saying, well, I bought it and I only own 2 people living there, but I may sell it to 10 people. Why should I?
Right, that's the problem with the code on that, you know. But, Ashley,
Kelly Mason stating that Fulton County Health Department will make seller update to a larger tank even if current tank is still working.
yeah, I could.
Yeah, they do.
Cheryl,
Just another good reason to give your seller advice, why it's good to check it prior to listing. 'Cause
Yes,
they can always
exactly.
disclose, I have a tank size for a 3-bedroom, if buyer accepts at that time, unless the lender or somebody else requires it done. But, you know, they just need to know what they've got under there. I know
Right.
one that they bought it without an inspection, now they're gonna spend 10 grand on
Right.
putting in a new system, because they never checked it when they even bought it.
yeah, I think it's really important for the seller to have a septic inspection before they list the house. Huge.
I'm gonna switch it to well. So in McLean County, we had a well inspection and septic, everything was to code. So my question is, and this could be even maybe for Jim, during the well inspection, not just the water test, the well inspection came back fine, functioning to standards, but the well pump only came to 24 cycles a minute. The manufacturer's recommendations for that pump is 60 times a minute. So, we asked for, it's a kind of a lot of discussion, but, I mean, it's not functioning to the manufacturer's recommendation. It is the code, it's functioning. How would anybody else compare this?
What the contract says is if the inspection is done to determine if the well has acceptable potability and does not require changes under applicable health code or local ordinances. So if the output of the water is only half of what it's supposed to be, what does potability mean? Is that the water quality, or is it the output of the quantity? Quality.
So there's 6 people on the well, and none of them are complaining about pressure. So, and I'm like, we have a well inspection to find out if there's a problem. So, you know, my buyers, lucky for you, have maybe found a problem that we don't have to now tackle in the middle of the winter.
Well,
Once
somebody
the work
just
goes out.
pointed out the answer to the question, because the next line does say, seller or buyer at whosever expense shall obtain an inspection to determine capacity and flow of the wells.
There's 2.
So that's a flow issue, and the seller's gonna have to fix that problem.
And it was a common well,
The shared well.
shared well? Yeah, you do. That's a longer story, so. Okay, does any,
We can talk about later on. Craig wanted to say something.
okay,
I was just gonna suggest on the seller, if you have a seller, that's another item that can be costly to the seller, and so why not recommend maybe running a radon test before they list it, so they know if they have to put a mitigation system in or not. And it's hard to, well, and that's the thing, if not all buyers ask for it, so, but if you don't want, an expensive item at the closing to have done, it's something that they could have tested, I guess.
How accurate are the tests you buy from Lowe's where you do it yourself? I mean,
You can do it yourself, they're just not the most accurate. They're not like our test equipment that are, a lot more
just
precise.
to give the seller a heads up though.
It would
You know,
give you,
way
yeah,
off the
that's
chart or-
a
but
suggestion.
keep in mind, they will have to disclose if they do that.
Right, if they do that, yeah.
Okay, does anybody, you have another question?
No, I'm saying.
Does anybody have any more questions? Because we have gone over, which I suspected that we would, but, any other questions? Yes.
Wait, but I want to go back to where the house was brought up to code, and I think someone at the panel said, within years, it's built. What about if they do have a, does that change that, and not run it again, like say, electrical, like P5, or what have you?
Okay, here. All right, I can't hear you, Terry. You gotta come up closer.
I have to come up closer, you have to come back.
Here, we'll take it back. You got a quiet voice.
Yeah, I know.
Phil Donahue's gonna bring you the mic. Another visiting code.
Thank you very much, thank you very much. But at any rate, like say if a house had been rehabbed, but certain things hadn't been changed, like electrical, GFI, would they not be grandfathered in any longer, and would they have to be changed, like the electric, or plumbing, or whatever the case may be? Because I think someone mentioned before that you don't have to bring a house necessarily up to code if it was built like 1950 or 1960. So I'm saying if it had to be rehabbed, or if it was rehabbed, they redid it and didn't change some of those things, would have to fall under the, making it code? As
Well,
far
that's
as.
gonna raise a couple questions. First of all, did they get a building permit? It's gonna
Sometimes
be,
they don't.
if the situation's gonna arise when they didn't. If they did do what they're, apply for the building permit, that's gonna get inspected to make sure it is up to code. But if they didn't ask for the building permit and they didn't wire it correctly, they can't be grandfathered in because they changed the entire system, they put in plumbing, electrical, it's not up to code. I think a buyer absolutely has a right to ask them to bring it up to code.
Okay.
Now, had it not been remodeled at all, then no.
Right,
If
but
it's still the original equipment from 1950, as long as it's working, the seller doesn't have to bring it up to code. But I think once somebody wants to flip a house and goes in and redoes it, they've opened themselves up to doing it the right way.
Cameron.
And with the energy efficiency rules written that way as well, where like if you remodel a basement after 2013, now you have to meet all of those new standards for energy efficiency. When we do an electrical inspection, if we don't have GFCIs,
If we do an electrical inspection and we see that there's no GFCIs in a bathroom that was remodeled last year, that's exactly the kind of situation where we call it out because we know that they would have been required at that time to bring it up to you. And it differs, some rules and regulations differ based on how deeply you tear into the house as to what you actually have to repair or replace, or upgrade, I'm sorry, so.
Melissa.
I know we're over on time, but can you touch on the as-is thing, because that gets really.
Oh, yes. Okay, and Jim, tell me if I say something wrong. As is, if a seller allows the buyer to have inspections, they can terminate the contract if the house is, if there's something seriously wrong with the house, they can terminate the contract. Now, a question that I asked Jim was how? Do they need to write a repair amendment? Because there's some agents out there going, they can have the inspections, but we don't want to know anything that's wrong, why you're getting out of the contract, okay? Cheryl is still there. I think Betsy has said, well, there's an issue there because something must be wrong or they wouldn't be getting out of the contract. So you can't skate disclosure that way, correct? Tell me.
In what document does it say that, look, inspect all you want, I don't want to hear what's wrong with it, if you want out, you can get out? Where does it say that? Is that a verbal communication between the agents? Okay.
We're getting an
So now you're preparing contracts that.
I'm just telling you, that's why this guy.
So if you're using the forms correctly, and the seller says, look, I'm selling this house to you as is, but yet the buyer submits the combo amendment, says I want to have inspections. Now the sellers open themselves up to a request for repairs. That's your way out. You ask for those repairs that are identified by the inspector. And if the seller says, look, I said it's as is, I'm not making any repairs, then the buyer says, okay, then I want out of the contract.
That's right.
And you get your money back.
As is, I know, as is just that seller is telling that buyer, I am not going to make any repairs. That's what that's saying. But then I'm gonna let you, because I don't want you to have to buy a house that's a money pit, So yeah, you can have all the inspections you want. That's all that, for a house to be completely as is, that amendment has to say, no, 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 except for termite. As is, they still get termite. That's an as-is house.
But the buyer could have an as-is amendment written up by an attorney, right?
Absolutely, and I do that all the time. basically says this, it says, seller, as part of the original contract, this is part of my offer, and I know it's an as-is provision, but I wanna have an inspection. And it's gonna cover everything under the sun. It's not gonna be limited to the roof or plumbing. If I find anything I don't like in that inspection, I want out. And so that's a separate document, and you ought to have an attorney prepare that, because it has contractual ramifications if the parties aren't on the same page and don't know what that means. But by all means, a buyer can submit that and have an attorney prepare, and basically what would be an as-is inspection amendment that says, I understand you're not making any repairs, but if in my own opinion there's something I don't like for whatever reason, I'm entitled to get out. If the seller signs off on that, then it's kind of the reverse as-is, and the buyer can get out for any reason or no reason at all. And seller, by the way, and I can put in the provision in there, by the way, I'm not gonna give you my inspector's report. Because there's an understanding from the seller that I don't want your report, but I'll let you out if there's something in there you don't like. You don't like the color of the bedrooms, you don't have to give me any reason at all. Have it inspected until the cows come home. If you don't like it, then I'll sell it to somebody else.
There are some communities, one in particular that I know of in Texas, and they just have 14 days. There's no all these addendums. It just says I'm gonna inspect till the cows come home, and I can get out for any reason. I mean,
Right.
and they say, well, that's really clean, because they all go into
Well,
it
absolutely.
knowing.
There's no reason that you can bring a buyer to a home and say, you know what, they'd like to have it inspected before we submit our offer. Seller, are you okay with that? They might just say, fine. And you save a lot of headache, because then they don't even submit the offer
You
if they
can
don't
submit
like
a repair amendment, but they don't have to fix it. You don't have
it.
to.
Right?
Well, right, you don't have to agree to any repairs. That's, you know.
So ideally, that's a better way to do it. You have your inspections done before you ever submit your offer, because now you're negotiating with all the cards on the table, because you know what repairs you're gonna ask. Your purchase price is gonna be based upon that, and you ask up front for what repairs, and you avoid all the headache later on.
So the amendment that you write up for agents, 2 questions. Then they don't have to submit a repair amendment because of the document that you drafted for you both to sign. Question number 2. Can you draft that within that 5 days that an attorney can review the contract? Once you have an accepted contract, an attorney modification, could that be considered an attorney modification
Sure.
to the contract within that 5-day period? Okay.
Can you define seriously wrong?
With the contracts, with the house, with the inspection.
Not in reasonable working order.
That a better house came up. That is seriously wrong.
To me, it seems like that would be something the seller would want more than the buyer, because you have an out if you submit a repair amendment, they're saying they're not gonna do any repair. Wouldn't the seller want that amendment more than the buyer, because I don't wanna know, I want you to just get out of it, because it, leaves them from having to make any disclosure. Right.
Yeah, except that house has been on the market for a year and a half. It's a tough sell, and maybe the seller kind of wants to rein in a little bit the buyer's ability to get out. But there are a lot of benefits to doing that.
So if the seller allows a buyer to have the inspections before they make the offer, so then the buyer, you don't have to tell the seller anything about it, so then the seller doesn't have to disclose anything, is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
I know it doesn't happen as often as
It's
it
not,
probably should.
because you're not in contract. You-
Okay.
It's a free look at the house.
How many sellers will let an inspector in and not have
It's happened one time with me. I just want to quickly, should we talk about when you don't come to an agreement on the repair amendment, buyer sends you a repair amendment that has items on there that are not contractual.
Okay.
And the seller says, this is not contractual, this is not contractual, I will do these repairs that fall within the parameters of the contract. Well, then this buyer thinks that because we cannot come to an agreement, that I'm gonna send a cancellation of contract, okay? So then the seller says, no, I'm not going to sign that But they gave notice that they want to cancel the contract. When can the seller put the house back on the market? You're in a dispute. Can the seller put the house back on the market?
Absolutely, I think the seller can keep the house on the market regardless of anything that goes on. Because if I'm the seller, I'm gonna anticipate there could be problems, right? So I'm gonna foresee that, you know what, if this thing falls through, I don't wanna pass up on other people looking at the house. So in your situation where you don't have say they submit a termination, and the seller says, no, I'm not gonna let you out because I've agreed to make the repairs I'm contractually required to make, and you two just can't reach an agreement. If I'm the seller, yeah, I'm gonna keep it active, but I'm still gonna tell the buyer that I'm expecting to close because I've agreed to make all the repairs, and maybe the seller did go ahead, make all the repairs, and it closes next Friday, so you better show up and buy my house because I made the repairs I'm required to make. At the same time, the seller has an obligation to always mitigate their damages. What that means is that, look, buyer, if you don't go through, I'm gonna send you notice under the contract, written notice that you failed to appear for closing, and I'm preserving my right to seek damages from you, whatever they might be. It might be specific performance, it might be money damages. So if I have to sell buyer number 2 for $5,000 less, I have the right to come after you for that. But I'm gonna mitigate my damages. I can't just sit back and do nothing and leave it pending and not show anybody for the next 6 months or a year, and because the court's gonna look back to the seller and say, what did you do to try to sell that house? So I think it's perfectly fine for the seller to put it back active, continue to list it, but I don't think a buyer can construe that to mean that, well, you just let me out of the contract, because that's not what they did. All you're doing is allowing showings.
Right, and when you have a situation like that, that's when you call Jim. Don't try to play attorney, because we will have situations like that. And there are a lot of contracts that are falling apart because of these repair amendments. And so, I always say, give Jim a call.
And that's, again, educating your buyer.
It is educating.
When you're preparing your repair amendment, to tell that buyer, you know what, we'll ask for this, but understand that the seller does not have to repair these items. When they come back, and the seller does in fact say, no, I'm not gonna repair those items, that your buyer's been prepared for that, so they don't think that they're entitled to terminate the contract. They still might want to terminate it, but at least you've educated them and set the stage for that discussion.
Exactly. T.
If they get an offer then during this time and you put your house back on the market and then get another offer, is it going to need to be as a backup offer or subject to release of number 1 or?
Yeah, technically that's correct, because you're still in contract with buyer number 1, and you've not terminated that deal. So you're right, you need to address that, perhaps before you sign off and accept the second offer, depending on that price. If you're gonna get the same price, no harm done, then you go back to buyer number 1 before you sign off, get yourself into a second contract, either terminate that deal and negotiate who gets the earnest money. But you're right, you could be in 2 contracts if you've not made that second offer a backup offer.
But what if you go past the closing date? You go past the closing date, and you're no longer in contract.
Depends how far after the closing date you go, because you've got that notice and right to cure within, is it, 10 days or 14 days? But if you're beyond that, then I think you're okay, because buyers in breach, they've not cured their ability to come to closing within those 10 days.
Can they agree to put the house back on the market, but not agree where the earnest money is, who gets the earnest money on that cancellation?
An attorney.
Well, yeah, because that probably happens most often, because you got stubborn parties on either side that aren't going to agree to the other getting the earnest money, so that could just sit for months with no agreement.
So they can release each other from the contract purchasing the home, but just limbo, not releasing the earnest money.
Yeah, they could. You could prepare a document, the attorney could prepare a document, I should say, that terminates the contract and leaves the issue about who gets the earnest money for somebody else to determine later, so that there's some clarity that the buyer's releasing any rights they have under that contract to allow the seller to go and negotiate with somebody else.
So maybe this was answered already, but so when the house comes back on the market of those repairs that the seller has to disclose?
Repairs they didn't make?
Yeah, the repairs that they didn't make.
If it's a defective condition,
Can you give me an example?
let's say it's an electrical problem, something's not wired correctly, or same with plumbing, if it's not functioning properly, and the seller's not made those repairs, then yeah, there is a defect now that the seller has knowledge of that needs to be disclosed.
You need to go back to the seller's disclosure and look at how they answered those questions. You know, one of the things is termite damage. You know, they may not know that there's been termite damage in a crawl space, because I don't do crawl spaces, you know, so now, you know, the buyer walks away because of all this damage in the crawl space, then that would be something that would have to be disclosed on the seller's disclosure.
Okay, one more question. With the seller disclosure, with the millions amount of rain that we had a couple weeks ago, and then also with all the roof damage with the hail, after the repair was made, if say the basement flooded or the roof was made, does the seller have to redo those disclosures? Like that there was water in the basement, but it was fixed, and then have the buyer and seller sign?
Disclosed.
You're talking about a
Even though it
situation
was
where the
fixed.
seller did have it fixed,
Yes.
it rained again, and you got a flooded basement again.
So if it rains and it flooded, they fixed it, they fixed the issue, do they have to go back and refill out those real property disclosures?
No, because now there's no longer a problem. Because there's no knowledge of a material defect, because they have a reasonable belief that the repairs have effectively been made. So there's nothing for a seller to disclose.
So Jim, you're saying when that happens, like I'll see a lot of real property disclosures that say, they'll say no to water, you know, any water in the basement, they'll put, at heavy rains, there was blah, blah, blah. They don't really have to fill that out that way.
If it's continual,
If
Well,
it's
no,
a
I mean,
recurring
they-
problem, yes, but if it's been fixed,
Right. they
then
don't
no.
have to.
Because there's no longer a problem that needs to be disclosed.
during heavy rains.
Yeah.
But that's continual. If it rains heavy every time, it's happening. If it just did it like the sump pump failed and they got water, and they fix it, then it doesn't
Right.
have to be.
But you can't tell them how to.
No, you can't.
Okay, any more? Now we really went over. Any more questions? Okay, I hope this was helpful.
Just one last thing, if you guys, if you ever have questions about the inspection reports that you're getting, call your inspector. I've been in a 17-year training program with my wife to be nice. I appreciate the callbacks actually in order to review and check the quality of how we're writing our reports.